The encounter at midnight. The roar of the motorcycle echoed across the near-empty streets of Los Angeles as Keanu Reeves navigated his way home after a grueling 14-hour day on set. The city was alive, as it always was, but at this hour, the energy was different, quieter, reflective, almost meditative. Keanu cherished these moments, where the hum of the engine beneath him matched the rhythm of his thoughts. Tonight, however, those thoughts were burdened with an inexplicable restlessness. Filming had gone well, the crew was in high spirits, and the wrap party invitation was tempting. Yet, Keanu found himself declining their offer, craving solitude instead. Perhaps it was the fatigue, or perhaps it was the weight of a life lived perpetually under the spotlight. As the neon signs of diners and 24-hour stores blurred past him, he decided to make an impromptu stop for a bite to eat. The golden arches of McDonald's loomed ahead, their glow cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Keanu pulled into the parking lot, the crunch of gravel beneath his tires grounding him momentarily. The restaurant was sparsely populated, a couple of teenagers huddled in a corner booth, an elderly man sipping coffee by the window, and a young family trying to corral an energetic toddler. It was a scene of quiet normalcy, a stark contrast to the chaotic world he often inhabited. Keanu ordered a simple meal, a cheeseburger, fries, and a coffee, before retreating to a booth in the corner. He placed his helmet on the seat beside him, its polished surface reflecting the fluorescent lights above. As he unwrapped his burger, the noise of the restaurant faded into the background, replaced by his own thoughts. That's when he noticed them. Two small figures entered the restaurant, their presence almost ghost-like in its quietness. They were twin girls, no older than 10, wearing matching yellow dresses. The dresses, once vibrant, were now dull and stained, their hems frayed from wear. The girls moved together in an eerie synchronization, their hands clasped as they navigated the room. Keanu watched, his curiosity piqued. The twins stopped at each table, their small hands outstretched, their voices too soft for him to hear. Most patrons waved them off, some with irritation, others with indifference. A few ignored them entirely, burying their faces deeper into their phones or food. What struck Keanu most was the lack of acknowledgement from the staff. It was as though the girls were invisible, ghosts drifting through the restaurant unnoticed. The twins approached his booth hesitantly, their wide eyes locking onto his for a brief moment before darting away. Up close, Keanu could see the exhaustion etched into their young faces, the kind of weariness that no child should bear. He smiled gently, hoping to put them at ease. "Hi there," he said, his voice soft but warm. "Are you okay?" The girls exchanged a glance, their silent communication speaking volumes. The braver of the two stepped forward, her small hand trembling slightly as she extended it toward him. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're hungry." Keanu's heart tightened at the simple, devastating request. He glanced down at his tray, suddenly feeling guilty for the untouched food before him. Without a second thought, he slid the tray toward them. "Here," he said. "Take this." The girls hesitated, their eyes flickering with both gratitude and suspicion. Slowly, they reached for the food, their hands moving with a cautious urgency. They retreated to a nearby table, sitting shoulder to shoulder as they devoured the meal. Keanu watched them, a sense of unease growing within him. Who were these children? Where were their parents? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more troubling than the last. As he observed them, he noticed something strange, an odd synchronicity in their movements, as though they were bound by an invisible thread. It was both mesmerizing and unsettling. Before he could gather his thoughts, the glass doors of the restaurant swung open. A woman stormed in, her appearance disheveled and her expression stormy. She zeroed in on the twins with laser-like focus, her movements hurried and aggressive. Keanu's instincts kicked in, and he stood up, ready to intervene if necessary. "What the hell are you doing here?" the woman barked, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the restaurant. The twins froze, their small bodies shrinking under her harsh glare. Ma'am, Keanu began, stepping forward cautiously, is everything all right? Are you their mother? The woman turned to him, her eyes narrowing. Who are you to ask? She snapped. Stay out of this. Keanu raised his hands in a placating gesture. I just want to make sure they're safe. The woman's laugh was bitter and sharp. Safe, she repeated. You think buying them a meal makes you a hero? You have no idea what's going on. With that, she grabbed the twins by their arms, yanking them toward the door. The girls didn't resist, but as they were dragged away, one of them turned to look at Keanu. Her eyes, filled with a mix of fear and desperation, seemed to plead for help. Keanu stood frozen, the moment searing itself into his memory. The bell above the door jingled as they left, the sound echoing in the silence that followed. He glanced around, expecting someone, anyone, to react. But the patrons remained indifferent, their gazes averted as though they hadn't seen a thing. Keanu sat back down, his mind racing. Who were those girls? What was their story? And why had no one stepped in to help? As the questions piled up, one thing became clear, he couldn't just walk away. He pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. Should he call the authorities? Would they even do anything? The woman's words echoed in his mind, you have no idea what's going on. Determined to find out, Keanu stood up, leaving his half-finished coffee behind. He stepped outside, scanning the parking lot for any sign of the trio. In the distance, under the dim glow of a streetlight, he saw them, a woman and two yellow-dressed figures disappearing into the shadows. Keanu's pulse quickened. He climbed onto his motorcycle, the engine growling to life beneath him. Without hesitation, he followed, the questions in his mind now accompanied by a single, unwavering resolve. He had to know the truth. Into the shadows. The rhythmic rumble of the motorcycle echoed through the deserted streets as Keanu trailed the trio from a cautious distance. The faint glow of his headlights cast fleeting shadows against the cracked pavement, illuminating the figures ahead just enough to keep them in sight. The twins' small forms were dwarfed by the woman who led them, her hunched posture and hurried steps betraying an urgency that Keanu found unsettling. He wasn't sure what drove him to follow them, curiosity, guilt, or a gnawing sense of responsibility, but as the shadows of the city deepened around him, he knew he was stepping into uncharted territory. The woman led the twins down a narrow alley lined with overflowing dumpsters and flickering neon signs advertising services that no one dared to name. Keanu slowed his bike, cutting the engine a block away to avoid detection. The sharp scent of garbage and grease assaulted his senses as he dismounted, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. From his position at the alley's entrance, he watched the woman and the girls disappear into a decrepit building. Its faded sign, once brightly painted, now barely legible, read, Thrift and Repairs. Keanu hesitated. Following them inside could be risky, but the memory of the twins' pleading eyes pushed him forward. He approached the building cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. The door creaked loudly as he eased it open, the sound echoing through the still air. Inside, the dim light of a single bulb swung overhead, casting unsettling shadows across the cluttered room. Shelves piled high with old appliances and discarded clothes lined the walls, and the faint hum of a distant machine buzzed in the background. Keanu ducked behind a shelf, careful to stay out of sight as he strained to hear the conversation taking place in the next room. Did you talk to anyone? The woman's voice demanded, harsh and accusatory. No, Mama, one of the twins replied, her voice trembling. You sure? You didn't tell anyone about the arrangement? We didn't, the other twin whispered. Good, the woman snapped. Because if you did, you know what'll happen. Keanu's breath caught. The edge in the woman's voice was laced with something darker, threatening. His instinct screamed at him to intervene, but he knew he needed more information. Bursting in now could put the girls in greater danger. As he shifted his weight to get a better view, his elbow brushed against a metal wrench, sending it clattering to the floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. Keanu froze, his heart hammering in his chest as the voices in the other room stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" the woman barked. Keanu barely had time to react before the door to the adjoining room slammed open. The woman emerged, her wild eyes scanning the room. In the dim light, her face appeared gaunt and hollow, her features sharpened by years of hardship. She clutched a rusted crowbar in one hand, her grip white-knuckled. Keanu stepped out from behind the shelf, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said calmly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. The woman's eyes narrowed. "You're the guy from the restaurant," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I followed you because I'm concerned about the girls," Keanu replied, keeping his tone measured. "I just want to help." "Help?" she sneered, taking a step closer. "You think they need your help? You don't know anything about us." "Then tell me," Keanu said, his gaze unwavering. "What's going on here? Why are they out begging for food?" The woman's face twisted with anger, but there was something else there too, a flicker of fear. "You don't get it, do you?" she hissed. "You walk in here with your perfect life, thinking you can save everyone. But you're in over your head, pal." Behind her, the twins peered out from the doorway, their wide eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Keanu's heart ached at the sight of them. "Look," he said, lowering his hands slightly. "I don't want any trouble. I just want to make sure they're safe. Whatever's going on, maybe I can help." The woman laughed bitterly. "Help? You think you can just throw some money at this and make it go away?" She shook her head. "This isn't some Hollywood script, pretty boy. This is real life. And in real life, people like us don't get saved." Keanu stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Maybe not," he said. "But that doesn't mean I won't try." For a moment, the woman seemed to falter, her grip on the crowbar loosening. But then her expression hardened again, and she pointed the tool at him. "Leave," she said through gritted teeth. "Now. Before you regret it." Keanu hesitated, his eyes flickering between the woman and the twins. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the gravity of the decision he was about to make. Finally, he nodded, taking a step back. "All right," he said. "I'll go. But if you ever need help, I'll be here." The woman said nothing, her gaze burning into him as he turned and walked toward the door. As he stepped outside, the cool night air hit him like a wave, and he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. But as he climbed back onto his motorcycle, his resolve only grew stronger. He wasn't giving up, not yet. From a safe distance, Keanu watched the building for hours, his mind racing with possibilities. Something about the situation didn't add up. The woman's hostility, the twins' silence, the way the cashier at the restaurant had brushed him off, it all pointed to something bigger, something more sinister. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Keanu made a decision. If the authorities wouldn't step in, he would have to dig deeper himself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Threads of the unknown. The first rays of dawn spilled over the horizon as Keanu Reeves pulled into a gas station on the edge of the city. The dim light made everything seem muted, as if the world itself were holding its breath. His motorcycle engine hummed softly as he parked, the low rumble fading as he cut the ignition. Keanu's mind was a whirlpool of unanswered questions and uneasy speculations, circling endlessly around the twins and the woman from the previous night. He slid off the bike, stretching his aching muscles, and approached the small convenience store attached to the station. A bleary-eyed clerk sat behind the counter, flipping through a tabloid magazine. Keanu nodded in greeting, grabbed a cup of coffee, and lingered by the window as he sipped the scalding liquid. He needed clarity, a way to make sense of the tangled web he'd stumbled into. Pulling out his phone, he began a search for information about the area surrounding the thrift shop. The results were sparse but troubling. The district had a reputation for criminal activity, unofficial deals, trafficking, and underground networks that thrived in the shadows. More troubling was a recurring reference to a name, the Shadow Network, a group notorious for preying on vulnerable populations. A chill ran down Keanu's spine as he pieced together the implications. The woman and the twins were likely entangled in something far more sinister than mere poverty. Yet he couldn't shake the memory of the twins' hopeful eyes or the fear etched into their faces. They were trapped, and if no one else was willing to help, he knew he couldn't walk away. Determined to act, Keanu decided to start with the thrift shop. He couldn't barge in blindly, so he planned his approach methodically. Back on his motorcycle, he retraced his route to the district, the morning sunlight giving the dilapidated streets an almost deceptive warmth. He parked a block away and began his reconnaissance on foot. From a safe distance, he observed the shop's entrance. Foot traffic was light, just a few figures slipping in and out, their interactions brief and furtive. None of them resembled shoppers, and Keanu noted how they avoided eye contact and glanced over their shoulders. He had seen enough criminal dramas to recognize these signs, but this was no movie. He was navigating real danger. The question remained, how could he gather information without tipping anyone off? The answer presented itself sooner than he expected. As he loitered near a street vendor selling newspapers and snacks, a man emerged from the shop. He was stocky and wore a leather jacket adorned with patches. His swaggering gait and watchful eyes marked him as someone important, or at least someone who thought he was. Keanu followed discreetly, maintaining a safe distance as the man walked toward a nearby diner. Once inside, the man slid into a booth by the window, ordering a coffee and lighting a cigarette. Keanu hesitated outside, weighing his options. If he approached directly, he risked spooking the man, or worse, alerting whoever was running the shop. But he needed answers, and this man might have them. With a deep breath, Keanu entered the diner, the bell above the door jangling softly. He slid into a booth 2 tables away, close enough to eavesdrop without drawing attention. The man's gruff voice carried over the low hum of the diner, and Keanu listened intently as he spoke into his phone. "Yeah, I've got the drop from last night," the man said, his tone low and gravelly. "They're working the kids hard, brought in a decent haul." He paused, exhaling a plume of smoke. "No, she's keeping them in line. The boss doesn't need to worry. They're too scared to try anything." Keanu's grip on his coffee cup tightened. He had suspected something darker was at play, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of anger surging through him. The man continued, oblivious to Keanu's presence. "Yeah, I'll swing by the warehouse tonight to drop it off. Should be quiet enough after dark. Just make sure the boss knows I'm handling it." He chuckled darkly, finishing his cigarette and stubbing it out in the ashtray. "Yeah, same place. Usual time. Later." Keanu watched as the man pocketed his phone and threw a few bills onto the table before leaving the diner. He waited a few moments before rising to follow, but his mind was already racing. The warehouse sounded like a key location, and if he could find it, he might be able to uncover the full scope of the operation, and perhaps a way to help the twins escape. The man led Keanu deeper into the industrial side of the district, where abandoned factories and crumbling warehouses lined the streets. Keanu kept his distance, blending into the sparse foot traffic and using the occasional parked car as cover. Eventually, the man stopped outside a large, rusted building. He knocked twice on the metal door, and it creaked open just enough for him to slip inside. Keanu circled the building, searching for a vantage point. A series of broken windows near the back offered a partial view of the interior, and he climbed onto a stack of pallets to peer inside. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The warehouse was dimly lit, its cavernous space filled with rows of makeshift beds and crates stacked high with various items. Children, many of them no older than the twins, moved silently between the rows, their small hands sorting through the crates under the watchful eyes of armed guards. It was a chilling assembly line of stolen goods and human suffering. Keanu's heart ached as he spotted the twins among the children. They worked methodically, their faces expressionless, but he could see the exhaustion in their movements. It was clear they had been at this for hours, if not days. The woman from the thrift shop stood nearby, her posture rigid as she barked orders at the children. Keanu's first instinct was to rush in and save them, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. This operation was too large, too organized. He needed reinforcements, and he needed a plan. Back at his apartment later that evening, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, mapping out his next steps. He thought about the resources he had access to, not just his celebrity status, but his network of friends and acquaintances who could help without drawing too much attention. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Jake," he said when the line connected. "I need a favor. And I need it to stay off the radar." Jake, an old friend and former private investigator, didn't ask questions. "What's going on?" he asked simply. Keanu explained the situation, keeping his tone calm despite the urgency coursing through him. He detailed what he had seen at the warehouse, the involvement of the twins, and his suspicion of a larger network at play. Jake listened intently, his silence punctuated only by the occasional scribble of notes. "All right," Jake said finally. "This is big, Keanu. Bigger than you might realize. But I'll help. Let me make a few calls. We'll need a team for this, people who know how to handle these kinds of situations." Keanu nodded, relief washing over him. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be dangerous, but he wasn't facing it alone. As he ended the call, he glanced at the pocket where the Hello Kitty keychains still rested. They were a small, almost trivial symbol, but to him, they represented a promise, a commitment to see this through. He wouldn't let the twins down. Not now, not ever. Tomorrow, the fight would begin in earnest. Beneath the surface. The following days blurred together as Keanu began assembling a team to help him tackle the shadowy world he had uncovered. Jake had come through, calling in favors from old contacts, people who operated in the underworld, but with a moral compass that still functioned in the darkest of times. Keanu was starting to realize that the problem was bigger than just a few kids trapped in a criminal network. It was a well-oiled machine, one that had been running under the radar for years. And now, it was coming for the twins. Keanu met with his team in a run-down, inconspicuous diner on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place where the windows were fogged from years of greasy steam and the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. He was seated at a booth in the far corner, a single cup of black coffee in front of him. His mind, however, was elsewhere. As much as he had tried to prepare for the reality of what was happening, there was no escaping the sinking feeling in his gut when he thought of the twins. The group gathered around the table, each one bringing their own set of skills to the table. Jake, who had a knack for hacking into systems and gathering intelligence from sources that remained hidden from the public eye, had already begun pulling together information on the operation. His fingers moved deftly over his laptop, opening files and sending encrypted messages. A woman named Sophie, an ex-cop turned private investigator with a reputation for getting things done quietly, sat beside him. She was the strategist, calculating, careful, and willing to go to lengths others wouldn't. Then there was Michael, a former military officer with a reputation for getting people out of tight situations. His job was to coordinate logistics and ensure the safety of the team, especially when it came to handling the children in the warehouse. Keanu leaned back in his seat, his hands folded in front of him. "We need to get them out of there. All of them. Not just the twins, but every kid in that warehouse. They can't keep doing this to them." His voice was steady, but the undercurrent of frustration was clear. Sophie nodded, glancing at the map of the city spread out before her. "The warehouse is a hub. The kids are being trafficked through there, but it's not just an isolated location. There are other warehouses, distribution points, who knows what else they're involved in. It's going to be a bigger operation than you think. Jake looked up from his laptop, pushing his glasses up his nose. We've traced the financial transactions. They're laundering money through a network of shell companies. But here's the kicker. Their biggest investors aren't local. We've got ties to international syndicates involved, too. He let that statement hang in the air for a moment, his fingers hovering over the keys as he scrolled through more encrypted data. We're looking at a global operation here, not just a local ring. Michael, who had been quiet up until this point, leaned forward, his brow furrowing. So, we're dealing with something much bigger than we thought. How do we break it without getting caught? The last thing we want is for this to backfire and have these kids disappear into the system before we can do anything. Keanu's gaze shifted from one team member to the next. He wasn't used to operating in the shadows, but the stakes were far too high to back down now. He had seen the hunger in the twins' eyes, the uncertainty. The way they had clung to the hope of a meal and a small moment of kindness had shattered his composure. These weren't just faceless children, they were individuals, each with a story, each with a future that had been ripped away from them. Jake broke the silence, tapping his fingers on the table. We need to hit them fast and hit them hard. No warning. We take down the warehouse first, and then we start pulling the pieces apart. We can't let anyone escape. Keanu looked over at him, a faint trace of worry crossing his features. What happens to the twins? They're too young to get caught up in this mess. We get them out first, then the rest. Sophie nodded, flipping through her notebook. We'll need to extract them without causing a panic. The moment the cops show up, the whole operation shuts down. They're not stupid, they'll scatter. We'll have to get the kids to safety first, and that means keeping them out of sight. We've got a few safe houses where we can lay low, but it's going to be a risk. Keanu was about to respond when Jake's phone buzzed, and he checked the message before typing furiously into his laptop. Got something. They've got a shipment coming in tonight. If we're going to do this, it's now or never. The team went silent, each person digesting the weight of the situation. The logistics were daunting, and the risks were high. But they had no choice. They couldn't wait for the authorities to intervene. The children didn't have that luxury. Later that night, the team assembled in a small, nondescript van parked a few blocks away from the warehouse. Keanu's motorcycle was hidden under a tarp nearby, ready for a quick getaway if things went south. Michael was at the wheel, his hands steady as he looked at the team through the rearview mirror. You ready for this? He asked, his voice low. Keanu gave a single nod. We're ready. Let's get the kids. The van rolled out of the alley and approached the warehouse, where dim lights flickered in the distance. They parked a few streets away, and Keanu felt his heart rate rise. He was used to facing dangerous situations, but something about the children, these innocent kids, spurred him on with a newfound urgency. The weight of their futures rested on his shoulders now. They moved swiftly, slipping into the shadows of the surrounding buildings, keeping low and quiet as they approached the back of the warehouse. Sophie led the way, her expertise guiding them through the back alley to an unmarked door near the rear. Jake hacked into the security system, disabling the cameras and unlocking the door with a practiced ease. Inside, the stench of stale air, dust, and oil hit them immediately. The large space before them was empty, the warehouse eerily silent except for the low hum of machinery in the corner. Michael raised his hand, signaling the team to pause. He peered around the corner and nodded. Clear. Let's move. They slipped into the heart of the warehouse, and the operation was underway. Children were scattered about in small clusters, all working without question, sorting through boxes of goods that were clearly meant for illicit purposes. Keanu's eyes scanned the room, searching for the twins. Suddenly, a rustle from behind a stack of crates caught his attention. There they were, the twins. Their faces, dirty and gaunt, turned in unison, locking eyes with Keanu. They froze, uncertain, as if they weren't sure whether to run or wait for him to make the next move. Keanu's heart sank, but he didn't hesitate. He moved toward them slowly, keeping his voice soft but firm. "Come with me. I'll get you out of here. You're safe now." The girls didn't run. Instead, they stood still, their faces war-torn with distrust, but there was a flicker of recognition in their eyes. Keanu's presence, his calm demeanor, seemed to ground them. Without another word, the twins slid their hands into his, their tiny fingers gripping his tightly as they began to follow him. Just then, an alarm blared, loud and shrill, echoing through the warehouse. The plan had been compromised. "We've got company," Jake shouted, sprinting toward the exit. The team didn't waste time. Chaos erupted in an instant. The guards, previously complacent, began moving swiftly toward their posts, weapons drawn. The clock was ticking. Keanu's focus sharpened, and with the twins now in tow, they had to make it out before it was too late. The team burst into action, moving with military precision as Michael directed them to the back exit. The moment Keanu reached the door, he turned to look at the twins, his heart pounding in his chest. Their faces, once full of fear, now held something new. Hope. They weren't alone anymore. And Keanu wasn't going to let them be again. But the danger was far from over. Now, with the twins in their care, Keanu realized that they had just uncovered the first layer of a very dangerous reality. There were still more children out there, still more enemies to face, and this fight was only just beginning. Breaking free. The night air was thick with tension as Keanu led the twins through the dark alleyways behind the warehouse. His pulse raced, the sound of his boots hitting the concrete punctuating the silence around them. Every footstep felt heavier now, every corner of the city seemed darker. Behind them, the piercing blare of sirens began to rise, signaling that they were no longer operating in the shadows of secrecy. The authorities were on their way, but Keanu knew the escape had to come first, and it had to be fast. His mind raced, calculating every move they made, every possible outcome. They couldn't go to the usual safe houses, those had been compromised by the network, too. This wasn't just a simple rescue mission anymore, it was a fight for survival. The twins, who had been so cautious when Keanu first approached them, were now walking close behind him, their small hands gripping his jacket as if he were their anchor in a world that had been nothing but chaos and fear. Behind him, Sophie, Jake, and Michael moved like shadows in the night. They had made their way into the heart of the operation and gotten the twins out, but the danger wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. "We need to move," Michael urged, his voice low but urgent. "There's no way they won't be looking for us by now. Let's get them out of here before things get messy." Keanu nodded, his mind sharp, instinctively assessing their surroundings. They were still a few blocks from their destination, a safe house that had been hidden under the guise of a small storage unit. It was their best option, but it wasn't foolproof. The network had eyes everywhere, and Keanu knew that the longer they stayed on the streets, the more likely it was that they'd be discovered. "We're almost there," Sophie said, looking over her shoulder. "Stay close and move quickly." The sound of distant sirens continued to grow louder, but it wasn't just the police that Keanu feared. There were people within the organization who would stop at nothing to retrieve the twins, and the deeper he got into this investigation, the more he realized just how far-reaching their influence was. The network wasn't just running illegal operations, it was a well-connected, global syndicate, with its hands in everything from human trafficking to money laundering to political manipulation. They had eyes everywhere, and the moment the twins were discovered to be missing, there would be hell to pay. As they turned a corner, Keanu saw the small storage unit in the distance, a run-down, inconspicuous building tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store. It looked abandoned, just like every other place in the city that was used for hiding. It wasn't much, but it was the best they had. The twins had been quiet since they'd left the warehouse, their small steps hesitant and unsure, as if they were still waiting for something to go wrong. Keanu glanced down at them, his heart aching. How many times had they been let down? How many times had they been forced to trust people only to have that trust shattered? "Everything's going to be okay," Keanu said softly, trying to reassure them, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "You're safe now." The taller of the two twins, the one with the darker eyes, looked up at him, her expression cautious yet curious. "Safe?" she whispered, as if the word was foreign to her. "No one's safe." "Not really." Her words hit Keanu harder than he expected. It was as if, in those few moments, she had spoken for every child caught in this merciless cycle, those who had been broken by the world around them and taught to believe that safety was an illusion. He could see it in her eyes, the hardened resolve, the scars that no one could see. The weight of the world had already settled onto her shoulders, and she was only a child. Before Keanu could respond, the sound of a car engine revved in the distance. The group froze, their eyes darting around. The van. It was coming too fast. They were exposed. "Move!" Michael barked, grabbing Keanu by the arm and pulling him toward the door of the storage unit. Sophie and Jake were already inside, ushering the twins quickly into the shadows. Keanu turned, looking one last time down the alley. The headlights were too close now, too glaring to ignore. With a last glance at the twins, Keanu stepped into the unit and slammed the door shut behind him. The space inside was sparse, the smell of damp wood and mildew clinging to the air. There was only a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting a dull glow over the boxes and crates that filled the space. This wasn't a safe house in the traditional sense, it was more of a temporary hideout, an in-between place where they could wait for the heat to die down. The twins huddled together in the far corner, their eyes wide with uncertainty. Keanu knelt down in front of them, trying his best to appear calm despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. "Stay here. Don't make a sound," he whispered, his voice steady. The last thing they needed was to alert whoever was following them. "I'm going to make sure we're safe." He turned to Sophie, who was already working on her phone, scanning through a network of secure messages. "What's the latest?" "Van's pulling up in front of the building now," Sophie said, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. "It's a search crew. They're coming for us." Keanu's stomach dropped. "We have to move fast. They can't know we're here." Jake stood beside them, a grim expression on his face. "There's only one way out. We have to go through the back alley, but we'll be exposed for a few seconds." Keanu didn't hesitate. "We'll take it." The next few hours were a blur of motion. The team moved quickly, but with careful precision. They had to stay under the radar, avoiding the prying eyes of the syndicate's enforcers. Keanu's mind was a whirl of planning and strategy. But underneath it all, one question kept gnawing at him: how deep did this go? Who could they trust? They didn't have the answers yet, but they were getting closer. With each new step, the mystery unraveled further, and Keanu's commitment to the twins, and every child still trapped in the system, grew stronger. As the sun began to rise over the city, Keanu stood on the rooftop of a nearby building, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, but there was no turning back now. Not when he had seen the faces of the twins, not when he had felt the pulse of their silent plea for help. The stakes were too high. There were too many lives at risk. And now, he had no choice but to follow this thread wherever it led, no matter the cost. Behind him, the twins slept soundly in the safe house, finally given a moment of peace. And for Keanu, that was enough for now. But as he looked out into the city, he knew the battle was far from over. It was just the beginning. The reckoning. The dawn was breaking slowly, casting long, golden rays across the skyline, yet Keanu felt as though the night had never ended. The quiet hum of the city in the early morning hours contrasted sharply with the chaos that had been brewing beneath the surface for days. In the makeshift safe house, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city, Keanu could hear the faint sounds of the twins' soft breaths as they slept, their faces at peace for the first time in what seemed like forever. But for Keanu, sleep was a distant luxury. His mind was a storm of unanswered questions, swirling with the weight of the situation that seemed to be unraveling faster than he could manage. The deeper he dug into the mysterious circumstances surrounding the twins, the more he realized that their story was not isolated. They were but a small piece in a far greater puzzle, one that stretched across the city, and possibly the world. What had seemed like an act of kindness, an innocent decision to help two children, was now spiraling into something much darker. The more Keanu learned about the network he had inadvertently stepped into, the more he understood how deeply entrenched its influence was. The syndicate that controlled the streets and manipulated the system was not just a criminal enterprise, it was a global, all-encompassing force that used its power and wealth to bend the rules of society to its will. And somewhere within this complex web, the twins were the key. But to what? As the sun rose higher in the sky, Keanu pulled himself out of the uncomfortable chair he had been sitting in for hours. His body ached from the constant tension, but it was the gnawing hunger in his chest that drove him to his feet. It was the hunger for answers, for resolution, for something that would give him clarity. He moved silently through the dimly lit room where the twins were still sleeping, their small forms nestled into the corner of the couch. Despite their physical exhaustion, there was something different about the way they held themselves now, something that hadn't been there before. It was a quiet resilience, a growing trust that had formed between them and Keanu in such a short time. And for that, he was grateful. Before Keanu could make his way to the kitchen to prepare something to eat, the soft sound of a phone vibrating in the room broke the silence. Keanu's hand instinctively reached for it, his mind already racing. The number on the screen wasn't one he recognized, but the coded message that followed was clear enough: the twins are not safe. They're still tracking you. The clock is ticking. Get them out of the city. Now. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. This was no longer just a rescue operation. This was a countdown, a race against time. The message was a warning, a sign that the network had discovered their movements and was closing in. He immediately called Sophie, his fingers trembling as he dialed. After a few rings, her voice came through, crisp and urgent. "We've been compromised," Keanu said, his tone urgent. "The network knows we have them. We need to move fast. We can't stay here any longer." Sophie didn't hesitate. "Where are we going?" "I have a contact, someone who can help us get them out of the city," Keanu replied, his mind already working through the logistics. "I'll arrange a vehicle. We need to be ready to go in 30 minutes. No mistakes." "We'll be ready," Sophie said before hanging up. Keanu's mind raced as he turned to look at the twins, who were stirring awake now, their eyes wide with uncertainty. The expression on their faces mirrored the fear that was beginning to take root in Keanu's chest. He had spent his life working through scripts, playing roles in movies where the stakes were high, but nothing compared to the reality of what was unfolding before him. These children were his responsibility now. Every step he took could mean the difference between life and death. The clock was ticking. Keanu wasted no time. He quickly packed a small bag with essentials, checking the locks on the doors and windows as he did so. They needed to move quickly, without drawing attention. He glanced at the twins, who were now sitting up, their eyes meeting his with a mixture of hope and fear. "We're leaving," Keanu said, trying to mask his own rising anxiety with a calm demeanor. "We'll be safe, but we need to stay quiet, and we need to stay together." "Understood." The twins nodded, but Keanu could see the fear in their eyes. Fear of what was to come, fear of the unknown, and perhaps fear that, after all they had been through, this moment of safety was fleeting. As they gathered their things, Keanu moved to the window, scanning the street below. The alley was quiet for now, but his instincts told him that it wouldn't stay that way for long. The network wasn't known for its patience. It wouldn't be long before they had eyes on them again. "I'm ready," Sophie said, appearing at the door with Jake and Michael close behind. The small team had worked efficiently, gathering supplies and organizing a plan of escape. Now it was time to put it into motion. Keanu nodded, his gaze lingering on the twins for a moment longer. "Stay close," he instructed them. "We'll move quickly, but don't make a sound." The group moved out of the safe house and into the alleyway, sticking to the shadows as they made their way to the rendezvous point. It was a series of narrow streets and hidden pathways, a labyrinth of back alleys where they could avoid being seen by the authorities or anyone else who might be watching. As they moved, Keanu's mind drifted back to the words of the twins, "No one's safe," and it struck him again how deeply those words resonated. These children had been raised in a world where safety was a fleeting illusion, something that could be stripped away in an instant. He had tried to offer them something different, a moment of peace, but now he realized just how fragile that peace was. At the rendezvous point, a van was waiting for them, its engine running quietly in the early morning stillness. The driver, a woman named Carla, was waiting anxiously. She was a friend of Sophie's, someone who had connections outside the city, someone who could get them through the checkpoints and out of harm's way. "Let's go," Keanu said, ushering the group into the van. "Now." As they drove through the streets, Keanu kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, his mind working overtime. He knew the network's reach was vast. Every moment they were in the city was one step closer to being discovered. But getting the twins out was only the first part of the plan. There was still so much more to uncover. The deeper they went into this, the more they realized the network's reach extended far beyond anything they had anticipated. The van rumbled down the highway, leaving the city lights behind them, the safety of the road offering some comfort. But even as they sped toward their temporary escape, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The twins might be safe for now, but there was no telling what the future held. And as Keanu looked at them in the rearview mirror, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to stop until he got to the heart of the network, no matter the cost. There was too much at stake now, too many lives on the line. The reckoning had only just begun. The road ahead was uncertain, but Keanu was ready to face whatever came next. He had come too far to turn back now.